Hello, everyone. Welcome to Jim's Clueless episode 2. This is all about bots and fraud, and I'm really excited to have you here and introduce some of you, because some of you may already know him, to someone who has done a lot of work in the industry of bot detection and fraud detection with media and websites. My good friend, Dr. Fou. And I'll add him to the stage. Hey, welcome to the show, Dr. Fou.
Hey, Jim. Glad to be here. Glad to be talking about this topic with you.
Oh, man. And we could talk for hours. I know you and I have known each other for years and have talked extensively about bots and fraud and the implications on analytics and media. Why don't you tell me in your own words what you do, what that means, and why it's so important?
Well, I've been studying the problem of fraud for probably 13 years now. And it really started when I was still at Omnicom. We were looking at some campaigns, particularly paid search campaigns, and we were seeing 150% click-through rates, 200% click-through rates. And in some cases, the clicks kept coming even after the campaigns were off. So clearly, something was wrong there. And at the time, no one had a good explanation for why we were still getting those clicks or a greater number of clicks than the number of ad impressions. So that's when I started looking into it. And, long story short, most people realize it's bot activity, right? So it's, people are talking about bots now. But basically, the bots had copied the click-through URL and they were just continuing to click on it, and they didn't realize the campaign was over. So that's what I study, and I try to help other companies, specifically advertisers, look at their campaigns as well, because most of these digital campaigns have bot activity that's kind of negatively impacting them.
So this is still an ongoing issue with bots and fraud. Like, you didn't just solve it all, 10, 12 years ago at Omnicom. Now, in my agency, they would have said, wow, this is a wild success. 200% click-through rate without even,
Yeah, yeah. No, it's just like any other form of fraud, or like counterfeit drugs and whatever. It's always an arms race. So when we're up against the bad guys will have better tech. They will be very quick at updating their bots once they're detected. So they're doing anything they can to avoid detection. So there's different kinds of bots, and if we tie this more closely to the digital advertising side of things, there's different forms of ads, and the bots will do different things, right? So if we're talking about CPM based advertising campaigns, where the bots just have to load 1,000 ad impressions and get paid, that's all they'll do, right? They'll just cause the ads to load by loading the pages. There's also CPC, which is cost per click, and that's kind of where I started. It was cost per click fraud, click fraud. In those cases, the bots also have to click on the ads in order to get paid, right? So they do that as well. And then just today, I wrote an article on cost per lead fraud, right, where the bots are filling out the forms online and submitting them because that's the only way they'll get paid, right? They have to submit the lead and then they get paid the cost per lead. So I think in each of these cases, you can kind of see the bots are of different levels of sophistication, but they will do exactly what they need to do to get paid. They're going to not work harder than they need to, right? So
But
that's
how do
kind of a
they,
quick overview. Yeah.
like, how are they getting paid? Like, are they, you know, are they in cahoots with people? Like, I
Yeah,
think that it would be okay.
that's a great question. The bots are usually part of a large botnet, right? So if we take a step back, most people might have heard of things like DDoS attacks, right? Distributed denial of service attacks. That's where the botnet can overwhelm a site with so much traffic that it goes down, right? But that's not a very lucrative use of the bots. So now when you take some of that traffic that can be generated by the botnet and you point it to websites that have ad tech on it, right? So when the bots load the page, they cause the ads to load. So in that sense, the bots get paid for generating the traffic. Okay. So there's not a whole bunch of bot makers out there because you don't even need to make your own bots. You can almost like rent time on someone else's botnet. So what we typically see are what we call traffic resellers. Okay, so if a fraudster started up a website and it has no visitors visiting, they need to buy traffic, right? So that's when they
Yeah.
go out and Google, oh, how do I get traffic for my website, right? So it becomes a very simple game of arbitrage, right? So if you
Yeah.
pay for the traffic at $5 and you earn $10 CPMs for your ad impressions, you've just pocketed $5 of pure profit. So that's how it typically works, right? So most people don't have to operate their own bots. They're just renting time on someone else's giant botnet to get traffic for their websites.
Well, tell me about this botnet. Like, I don't know what a botnet. I mean, it sounds like if I imagine a botnet, I imagine a gigantic farm of servers and like bad guys wearing masks and they're watering the servers to make sure bots go up. But it sounds like they're just kind of an intermediary.
Yeah, so most everybody is an intermediary, right? There's only a few bot makers that maintain these very large botnets, but those botnets can be used for different purposes, whether it's DDoS attacks or generating a lot of traffic on websites. So the bots can be made from headless Chrome browsers. So these are just browsers, and the reason we use the word headless is that there's no screen, right? So normally humans would have to look at a browser on a screen in order to know where to point, where to click, and all
Uh-huh.
that kind of stuff. But headless browsers are simply an automated form of a browser where it can be remotely controlled and someone can actually manage 1,000 browsers, right? Headless browsers, and tell it to go visit different web pages, do different activities like fill out the form, that kind of stuff. So there can be bots that are created in a data center, and that's the majority of these bots because they're just very simple and all they have to do is cause the page to load and cause the ads to load. But there are other forms of bots that are more advanced, and these are typically malware on people's devices, right? So if you accidentally download something onto your phone or download something onto your laptop, the malware can be active kind of behind the scenes in the background of your phone. And not only can they sit there and steal your credentials, right, steal your logins and passwords, but because it's active on your device, it can also load web pages, it can also load ads, it can also click on stuff. So in those cases, that's what I would call a little bit more advanced type of bot, right? That's based on malware that's sitting in people's devices, right? So again, those would cost more, obviously, because it's a little bit
Yeah.
harder to get malware on people's devices. So the vast majority of the fraud that I look at come from simple bots that are just headless Chrome browsers in the data center. And now that there's lots of ads running in mobile devices as well. There's also mobile emulators, which are basically similar to those headless Chrome browsers. All they have to do is run the mobile game continuously so that the ads just keep loading in the background, right? So there's different kinds of bots of different levels of sophistication.
And how big of a problem? You said the majority of bots do this, majority of bots do that. But I mean, when I look at my analytics data or when I look at my media data, I still compare everything to some kind of benchmark and I still see that like, okay, realistically, I know that some part of my traffic is fake or fraudulent. Like, how big of a problem are we talking about here?
It depends entirely on the nature of your site, and also like if we're talking about digital marketing, there's going to be a lot more bot activity. So let me kind of break it down to kind of the uses of the bots. So if you're
Okay.
a publisher site and you have valuable content, right, whether you're a New York Times or CNN or something, right, you have valuable content. The bots that hit your page are there to steal your content because the bad guys do that to harvest the content so that they can remix it on fraudulent websites. Okay. So that's one set of bots. There's also some good bots like the search engine crawlers, Google bot. You actually want those bots to come to your site to index the content so others can actually find it, in search. So in those cases, those bots are fine. Now, there's many other forms of bots that do other activities, right? You've heard of uptime checkers, right? These are bots that load the page to make sure your website is still live and all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
again, not all bots are bad, but now when we talk about digital advertising, there's a heavy concentration of bots in this activity, right? Because if you're a fake site, you don't have any human visitors because humans don't visit sites that they don't know about. Okay, so in those cases, when those websites go out and buy the traffic, it's literally 100% bot traffic, right? Because there's not a whole bunch of humans sitting around with nothing to do but go to your website when you tell them to. It just doesn't work that way. So in those
Okay.
cases, you can say for the fraudulent websites, 100% of the traffic is bot traffic, right? Which whereas for the legitimate publishers, maybe 1 to 5% of the site traffic is from bots, right? So it kind of depends on the situation.
So what do the ad services do about it? Like why are they, I mean, are they taking measures to eliminate these bots, or are they just kind of like letting it
So,
happen?
so you can say yes, they are taking measures to eliminate the bots, but they're not doing a very good job of it. Okay, so whether they're doing it themselves or whether they're using a fraud verification vendor, right? So a lot of these people know about these legacy vendors. The legacy vendors are not very good at catching these bots, and the bots have years of experience getting around their detection, right? So most of the bots still get through. But if you think about analytics platforms like Google Analytics, they are required by the standards, right, by the IAB to filter obvious bots, right? So some of these bots are obviously like Google bot or ones that say their name. So the search engine crawlers or any other bot that declares itself, right? We call those declared bots.
Mhm.
So if those bots tell you they're a bot, they have to filter it out. Now, the problem that creates in analytics is that Google Analytics does filter out some bots. The problem is you don't know which bots they were and how much was filtered out. So you're often left with a discrepancy in your analytics that you can't explain because Google Analytics was trying to do its job and filter them out, right? And the ad platforms do the same thing. They are successful in filtering out the most obvious bots, the ones that come from data centers, or the ones that tell you they're a bot, right? So those they can filter out. But you can imagine that the more advanced bots are doing everything they can to disguise themselves. So they look just like Chrome, they look just like iOS, Safari or whatever. So those all get by, right? So we
Yeah.
need more advanced forms of detection to then still say, okay, well, here's a large portion of your ad impression we're still loaded by bots and not seen by humans, right? So that's where in digital
Yeah.
marketing we have to do extra work.
So we have a few questions already, which is fantastic. And you might see a familiar face here if you watched episode
Mhm.
1. First one's
Yep.
from Nate, who said, "What are the primary types of bots or purposes you see used? Seems like most works protect mainly against data scrapers." And you talked about scrapers a little bit, and you also talked about the bots that are there to make money through paid ads and inflate their site traffic as a publisher.
Yeah.
Um,
You have to just understand, like, depending on the nature of the site, right? So if it's a
yeah,
publisher, like we said before, the bots are there to steal their content. Whereas for the advertisers, the main bot activity that's affecting them are bots causing ads to load. And that way they're paying for ad impressions that simply were not shown to humans. And that's basically not what they thought they were buying. Right. So for an
yeah,
advertiser, they need to ensure that their ads are seen by humans so that they can have some kind of marketing outcome or marketing impact. So again, it depends on the scenario. There's so many different kinds of bots, there's so many different levels of sophistication of the bots. We really have to understand the context in which we have to detect. So getting back to the scraper bots, or maybe the ones that are clicking on the ads, some
yeah,
of the legacy fraud detection companies are doing browser analysis, right? So someone in the comments said they're doing browser profiling. If you're looking at the user agents, right, which is like Chrome versus Firefox versus Safari, the most advanced bots are easily able to just fake that, right? So you're not
yeah,
going to see any kind of discrepancy in there. And other kinds of bots where in the user agent they said it's headless Chrome, or they said it's Google bot, or they said it's adsbot.google, right? So those are the declared ones. So again, there's no merit in catching those because the bots told you they were bots, right? So
Yeah.
when we deal with the more advanced ones, they're going to spoof the user agent perfectly. So you won't be able to tell just by looking at the user agent. The other thing that's important here is to talk about the IP addresses. Okay, so a lot of people assume that IP addresses are sufficient for bot detection. That might be the case 15 years ago, because back then, when we see an IP address from data center like AWS or Amazon Web Services, that was pretty much guaranteed to be a bot because most humans don't access the internet through AWS, right? They have
Mhm.
Verizon, they have Comcast for their cable modem at home or something. So when we see a data center IP address 15 years ago, that was a pretty good indicator that it's a bot. But most bots these days, especially the ones that are trying to disguise themselves, will be able to bounce their traffic through residential proxy networks and therefore disguise their IP address to appear to be residential. So just looking at the IP address is not going to be good enough to tell whether it's a human or a bot, right? You should think of that the IP
Yeah.
address is just one ingredient of potentially hundreds that you have to look at to figure out if it's a bot or not, right? And then on the flip side, humans now use VPNs. So humans actually appear to be data center IP addresses, right? So again, IP
Yeah.
addresses are not very reliable for fraud detection anymore.
What are some of those unique interactions that one might look for that's not immediately obvious, like user agent or IP that that are often indicators of bot traffic?
Well, there's some basic stuff that we can see just by looking at click patterns and mouse move patterns and touch events and stuff like that. So I won't give away too much details, but some of
Sure.
the
Yeah.
more obvious things are where we see bots clicking on the exact same pixel location on screen, right? The same XY coordinate on screen over and over again. Just imagine you can't get a whole bunch of humans to click on the exact same pixel on the screen over and over again, right? So when we see that repeated clicks on the same pixel, it's obvious it's a bot. The other stuff would be where we see the clicks happening in the upper left-hand corner of the screen, where the XY
Yeah.
coordinate is 0 by 0. Okay, most people can't even click the upper left-hand corner of the screen, right? So some of
Yeah.
those are obvious. Now, there's going to be a little bit more advanced bots that can mimic human behavior, and the most advanced ones will basically record a human session, right? So they record the mouse movement patterns, they record the clicks, and they simply replay it. So
Yeah.
there's many ways the bots can defeat the detection. It's just a matter of how hard they're willing to work to get around the detection, right? So in some cases, when we're talking about very expensive cost per clicks or maybe cost per leads, it may be worth the bot maker to put in that kind of effort. But for the majority of cases that I look at, which is just causing the ads to load, they're not going to put in that kind of effort. So we're still able to relatively easily catch all those bots.
And Yeshua followed up by saying, I've been trying to use behavioral indicators to identify browser profiles.
Yeah,
They tend to fail SMS verification, for example, but hitting a plateau, not sure of the next
yeah,
steps. And now, in my experience, you know, we often would block out, okay, Linux operating system and some browser that we know is like 10 years old,
yeah,
running headless
exactly.
Chrome or something like that. How realistic is it to block out most of the bots using even a just a front end script?
You're going to catch the basic ones. Like the Linux operating system, there's an increasing number of people using Chromebooks, and Chromebooks have Linux OS, right? So sometimes that may not be the best way because you may actually be blocking out or filtering out Chromebook users, which are humans. So you have to be a little bit more detailed about that. And then some of the behavioral signals that we talked about before, the bots are able to fake all that. So the point is, it's still an arms race against the bot makers. They have the ability and they have the tech to defeat anything that we can use to detect. But the question is whether they're going to put in that kind of effort, right? So there are going to be certain scenarios, like we said, for financial services, for insurance, for certain high value type advertising, they may put in that kind of effort to sufficiently defeat any level of detections that you can have.
Have you found that the problem's gotten worse with the advent of large language models and GPT and stuff like that, where folks it's more accessible for people to build these bots and train it and modify it, where they might not have had the ability to do it before, or no?
No, so most people are not going to build bots, whether it's using any kind of AI or whatever, right? So most of these are simple arbitrageurs, right? So they're setting
Yeah.
up fake websites. Like they can set up 10,000 WordPress sites and just populate it with stolen content, right? So I've seen cases where the content on the website is literally plagiarized directly from Reddit. So all that's human generated anyway. So, and the human who wrote the Reddit post is not going to find out that all these fraudulent websites have copied their Reddit post, right? So that becomes a very convenient and, long running way of populating those fake websites. The other thing that I've seen them do is hot link images from Getty. So, Getty
Yeah.
images have pictures of the royal family and whatever. They simply hot link the image from Getty, but just show the top portion of it and basically exclude showing the Getty images watermark. Okay. So
Yeah.
they're not even paying for the bandwidth of hosting images, right? These are the fraudulent websites. So when they have a set of 10,000 websites, they can just rotate through domain names. They don't care, because if we catch them and we block the domain, they've got 10,000 more ready to go. So in those cases, again, we're just trying to keep up with the bad guys, right? You've heard the term whack-a-mole, right? For
Yeah.
every 10 websites we take down, there's 100 more that they can put up. So I think one of the best practices for the marketers is to really start moving towards inclusion lists, because there's just too many bad guys sites and apps to block. If you have an inclusion list, it's still not perfect, but at least you don't have to keep updating those inclusion lists every day, every week, because the bad guys have 10,000 more sites they can put
Now,
into rotation.
what does that mean? What is it? What do you mean have an inclusion list? And I think where this relates more to paid media. Um,
Yeah, to
right.
digital advertising, paid media. Yeah. So when you buy ads now, you're basically saying, okay, I have this budget to spend. Go find me the websites that are willing to run my ad, right?
Yeah.
So 15 years ago, 20 years ago, a lot of the advertisers were buying ads directly from publishers, right? They would go to New York Times, they would go to Wall Street Journal and negotiate a deal to place ads on those publisher sites. But with the advent of programmatic media buying, it's kind of like Wall Street, right? So Wall Street, the stock exchange, brings together buyers and sellers of shares of stock. Programmatic exchanges brings together buyers and sellers of ad impressions, right? And you're basically bidding on those ads. So now the advertisers are no longer buying ads from publishers. They're buying ads from the programmatic exchanges. And in those exchanges, you might have hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of sites and apps selling ad impressions, right? So with the advent of programmatic, we now have long tail websites that nobody's ever heard of selling ad impressions to the largest of advertisers, right? So again, with the advent of programmatic, that's when the problem of ad fraud actually blossomed, right? It created
Yeah.
much more opportunities for the bad guys to sell ads to large advertisers. So in those cases, when you just buy from the exchange, your ads can go to hundreds of thousands of different websites. So when I say use an inclusion list, that means you say, here are the list of, say, 5,000 websites or 1,000 websites that I only want to buy from. So that severely limits, the number of sites. And so it helps you avoid lots and lots of the fraud that are happening on these long tail sites that nobody's ever heard of.
If you for the analytics folks out here who might not have spent a lot of time in media, programmatic's basically like display. There are a few
Yeah,
networks
display
that have
ads, video ads. Yeah, so you can
yeah.
buy all that. Now you can even buy CTV ads through programmatic exchanges.
So tell me about that. Like, so CTV, which can you tell us what CTV is?
Yeah, CTV means connected TV. And typically when you're streaming ESPN or when you're streaming the World Cup or Euro, 2024 right now, um, those are the publishers that are providing that kind of content. And then when you go to commercial break, the ads are actually delivered through the data channel, right? So as opposed to ads you see on TV, which are just delivered through broadcast, all of these streaming sellers are now selling connected TV ads that are stitched into the content stream that you're watching. Okay, so that's technically what CTV means. But now, you can actually buy and sell CTV ad impressions through programmatic exchanges. And again, that's where a lot of the fraud is happening because the bad guys can simply pretend to be a CTV when it's actually not, right? We've seen cases where smart refrigerators are pretending to be CTVs and sending in CTV bid requests and getting paid. We've even seen JavaScript code in ad slots do that.
Yeah.
Basically, they're faking the CTV impression. So again, when you're buying CTV and paying very high prices for it, you want to make sure your ads are showing on the big screen, not on websites or crappy mobile apps and all that kind of stuff.
How do you do that? Like, how do you?
The best way to do that, just like the best practice for a lot of the fraud that we've been talking about, is to buy direct from the real sellers, right? So literally go buy from New York Times, from Wall Street Journal, from ESPN, from publishers that you've heard of. Because
Yeah.
again, remember I said before, humans don't visit websites they never heard of before, right?
Yeah.
So there's only a very finite number of sites and apps that humans use every day. So in fact, one simple thing I've done in class, right? I used to teach a digital marketing class. I would simply ask my students to name 10 websites as fast as they can, right? 10 websites that they visit every day. They'll probably rattle off 3 or 4 or 5, but then when they get to 7 or 8, they slow down. They can't even get to 10 websites that they visit every single day, right?
Yeah.
So humans tend to visit repeatedly the same sites over and over, right? I start with New York Times, I start with Wall Street Journal, right? I check news and things like that in the mornings. So people usually have those same habits. So when we talk about the long tail of websites where there's tens of millions of sites, who visits those, right? How many humans actually visit those at any kind of scale, right? So that's where we have most of the fraud, because if it's not humans visiting those sites, it's basically bots loading the pages that cause the ads to load. So kind of answering your earlier question, how big of a problem is it? It's actually gotten larger and larger over the years because the advertisers are demanding far too many ad impressions to buy. There are not enough humans on Earth to generate the trillions upon trillions of ad impressions that are being bought and sold every month through these programmatic exchanges, right? So you can
Uh,
kind of use some common sense to tell some of that is completely out of whack from reality.
that's interesting. So it sounds like, you know, it sounds like there's so much fraud that it's impossible to hide. And and to me, it also sounds like, well, if I'm an ad platform and I'm an agency, I want to fulfill those buys. So
Yeah,
what's the incentive for some of these for these folks to solve for this problem?
you're exactly right. It gets to kind of perverse incentives or misaligned incentives. So any of these exchanges in the middle will make more money when more volume of ads flow through their system, right? So they make a percentage of the fees. So they have no incentive to shut it down, right? They may be able to block some of the most obvious bots, but they really don't have an incentive to lop off a large percentage of their impressions. So that's why, having worked or studied this problem of fraud for 13 years, it's still not solved, right? Because
Yeah.
we really can't solve it for the industry where many of the players don't want it solved because they're making so much money on the volumes created by ad fraud. So what
Mhm.
we're ending up doing is using analytics to solve fraud for specific advertisers who care. And I'll tell you that since the pandemic, right, since 2020, it's really kind of that served as a turning point because prior to the pandemic, no one wanted to rock the boat, right? Everything was going
Yeah.
smoothly. They were buying lots of ads, they were getting lots of clicks. It seemed
Yeah.
like it was working. So nobody wanted to raise their hand and say, oh, we got to look more closely at this, right? No one wanted to rock the boat. But because
Yeah.
the pandemic, right, this external force rocked the boat for everybody, I'm finally seeing advertisers asking harder questions, and everyone knows their budgets are going to get tighter, right? So where can they
Yeah.
save some cost? Where can they cut some stuff that, is obviously waste and obviously fraud? So in recent years, right, since 2020, we've seen a big uptick in advertisers who are asking for better analytics with respect to their ads, right? And now that they're looking with my platform FouAnalytics, they can actually see that there's far more fraud than they thought there was, right? Because the legacy verification vendors that they were using were consistently reporting 1% fraud for the last 8 years, right? So they really couldn't see anything. But now with more detailed analytics, they can say, oh, well, we're seeing way more fraud than we did before. And
Yeah.
because we have the details, they can say, oh, we know where this fraud is coming from, right? It's coming from these bad sites and these bad apps. So we can add them to a block list. And once they do that, they can kind of cut off that flow of dollars to those bad guys and therefore save money and make sure that their media dollars are being spent better on better websites and better apps.
Now you're saying that the old guard of bot detection was detecting 1 to 2% for most
Yeah.
campaigns, and I'm assuming this is mostly programmatic. What percent are you actually seeing when you actually dive down and look at the sites that aren't real? Which I've seen a lot of them personally.
Yeah.
You go on a
So
site, it's all the same template.
yeah, exactly. Like all these are WordPress templates and all the content is plagiarized. So it totally depends on how strict the advertiser was buying the ads in the first place, right? So if they were very, very strict, if they used a very small inclusion list already of good sites, then they would have avoided most of the fraud. But if we look at some super large campaigns, so I'm working with global advertisers and they're literally buying ungodly numbers of impressions, right? 1 billion impressions per day, where there's only 7 point something billion humans on Earth. Okay, so the
Well,
numbers are
keep in
completely
mind,
out of whack. Yeah,
we've been brainwashed
yeah,
to say that, well, someone saw it, therefore that adds value to our brand, and so we
yeah,
just want to make that view number go up
yeah.
at all
So the view
costs.
number, the impression number, the click number, all those are
Yeah.
kind of like higher scores are better, right? So you have a video game mentality, but we really shouldn't be doing digital advertising as if we were playing a video game, right? So in those cases, we see lots and lots of fake websites in the mix, right? And I constantly see new websites that I've never heard of before, right? So bad guys are constantly rotating websites. There's also the problem of mobile apps, right? So now there are millions upon millions of mobile apps, and some of those are like flashlight apps or kids coloring apps. And what the bad guys are doing is they're cloning the mobile apps as well, just like they clone the websites. So now there's tens of millions of those mobile apps that your ads are showing in. None of those are actually being used by humans because, again, humans are not using mobile apps they've never heard of before, right? They might be using Candy Crush, they might be using Pokemon Go and those ones that you have heard of before. But there are tens of millions of these long tail apps that are simply eating up all your impressions. And you think you're showing billions upon billions of impressions to people, but vast majority of those are not. So to answer your question, in those cases, 99.9% of the impressions are not shown to humans.
99.9%. And
Yeah.
that's just flushed. Have
Yeah.
you
Flush down
run
the toilet.
into issues with teams wanting to hold themselves accountable for stuff like this? Number one, I know the answer to this. And number two, given that you do, how do you phrase, how do you try to influence that team to be better at holding themselves
Yeah.
accountable? And you see where I'm going with this.
Yeah, I have an article where we actually have dealt with this, over the years. So when we talk about fraud, it's a very scary topic for a lot of people. And when we go back and say, look, you've been ripped off for the last 8 years, no one wants to hear that, right? That's too difficult of a conversation to have. So what I'm finding more helpful is talking about getting better analytics so that you can actually see better, so that you can actually do better, right? So for the last 10, 15 years, they've been using these old legacy fraud verification vendors that couldn't catch anything, right? So when they just give you a report that says it's 1% fraud, it's almost like, don't worry about it, right? It's below the noise
Yeah.
level, check the box. They told us it was fine.
Yeah.
So they really couldn't even see the fraud that was there. Okay. And the way you should really think about that 1% is the 1% is all the fraud they could catch. not all the fraud there is. Okay, so now that you have better analytics and you can actually see where the fraud is coming from, you can see many, many more of these fake websites. You can see all these flashlight apps or these keyboard apps just chewing through your impressions. You can actually then take action, right, and start adding them to a block list. Now, just to allay some of the people's fears about how much work this is going to take, you don't have to put 10,000 sites into your block list every day. You don't have to analyze 10,000 sites, 100,000 sites. You only have to analyze 10. The ones that matter the most are the ones that are eating up the largest percentage of your impressions, right? So when we look at some of these campaigns, one bad app could be eating up 10% of your impressions. So if you looked at that app, you looked at its fraudulent activity and you decided, okay, I don't want to buy ads from this fraudulent app anymore. You add that one app to your block list, you've just solved 10% of your fraud. So what I recommend is using the analytics. You basically put a process in place to clean up your campaigns progressively, right? You're not going to be able to clean it up overnight, because if your starting point is like 90% fraud, you can't go back to your boss and say, whoops, we've been ripped off to the tune of 90% for the last 5 years. Okay. You need a transition plan. So what we're doing is, let's take out the top 10 bad guys first, right? And then wait a week, wait 2 weeks, and then take out the next top 10 bad guys. So that way we're progressively cleaning the campaign. You're going to see your impression numbers go down because there's not that many impressions to buy that are real. You're going to see your clicks go down because a lot of those bots were also clicking on the ads to make it look like they were working. And then you're going to see your your prices, CPM prices creep up, right? Because again, those very low cost websites were fraudulent anyway, right? So you're wasting your money. So all of those things take time to transition, right? So some advertisers might be very aggressive and complete that transition process in 6 months. Others may need longer, right? So they may plan a 12-month transition process or 18-month transition process so that they can get to better, more clean and more effective digital campaigns. But again, each advertiser can now set their own process and pace with which to clean up their campaigns. So
what you're telling me,
I don't have to convince them, right? They really need to set that process in place for themselves.
what you're telling me is my costs can go up and my impressions can go down. Sign
And
me
you're
up.
still going to save money. Yes. So let me actually articulate that
Yeah.
a little bit more clearly. Okay. So 15 years ago, when advertisers were buying direct from publishers, right, they might be paying $30 CPMs. Now, when they're buying through programmatic exchanges, they say, oh, yeah, we're saving money. You're not saving money when you're paying $3 CPMs, but buying 10 times the quantity, right? So even though the CPM looks a lot better, the CPMs are prices, not cost, right? You have to multiply the price by the number of units you buy, right? So $3 CPMs, but 10 times more quantity means you're still paying $30. So compared to 10 years ago when you're paying $30 CPMs, now you're paying $3 CPMs and buying 10 times the quantity. You're still paying $30. So it's really a misconception that they're saving money. You're not saving money. You're still paying $30, but now you're buying $3 crap from open exchanges. That's why it's gotten worse. So just to kind of
Well,
recap what you said, you can buy far
yeah.
less quantity, pay higher CPM prices, and you can still save money because you end up only needing to spend $10 of advertising instead of 30 to get the same kind of outcomes.
So I think it's great that we're solving for programmatic. I have 99.9% of my traffic is bots. We figured that out. But my organization migrated to just paid search a while back, and paid search has zero problems with bots and fraud, right?
Actually, very opposite to that. So, the paid
No.
search part of it has the problem of your ads can run on Google itself, and humans Google things, right? So that's where you should put your ads. But there's something called Google Search Partners, which are all the sites outside of Google that carry their search ads. In those cases, we get back to the same exact problem, right, of these long tail sites. These fake websites have both the motive and the means, i.e., bots, to not only load your ads, but also click on them so they can get paid the CPC. So search is also fraught with fraud because of bot activity. And you can actually avoid most of it, right? You don't need any special tech. You don't need my
Yeah.
platform, whatever. You can basically avoid it by turning off those audience networks, those outside sites and apps. Same thing with Meta, same thing with Facebook, Instagram, whatever. Humans are logged into Facebook all day long. They're logged into Instagram all day long. So if you leave your ads on those platforms, and turn off FAN, which is the audience network, you can avoid the majority of the fraud. So therefore, you can make your campaigns a lot better.
How do I go about, like, how do I measure that? Like, I probably have to have something on the website
Yeah,
to determine whether traffic coming in from, like, other sources is fraudulent. Is that
exactly.
how? Okay.
So there's, I think for Meta, for YouTube, and those kind of places where we cannot measure the ads themselves, you would put the analytics code, for example, FouAnalytics, on your website, on your landing pages, so that you can see the quality of the clicks coming through to your site. Now, beyond that, right, the quality could be okay, yeah, some of these clicks are from bots, some of them are from humans or whatever, right? So you can look at the ratio of that and you can very easily reallocate your budget to sources that are sending you more human clicks and then
Yeah.
reduce your budget to sources that are sending bot clicks. But what's more important is looking at the what I'm going to call the attentiveness of the users that get to your page. So it sounds kind of like attention, and it might
Ah,
remind you of viewability as well. But I use the word attentiveness to kind of collectively talk about whether those users that arrived on your page did anything else. It all goes back to a very simple concept. When humans deliberately click on an ad, for example, a search ad, right, or even
mhm.
a display ad, that means they were curious about something. So when they get to your landing page, they're probably going to look around and do something, right? Scroll up and down, click something, whatever. If you get a user that comes through to your website and then doesn't do anything and then just leaves, that's kind of what you already see, right? You see that as very high bounce rates or low time on site in your existing
Mhm.
Google Analytics. What I'm looking for is kind of like the next level. So if we can solve for a lot of the bot clicks and we can get more and more human clicks to come to the site, the next level is whether those users actually went on and did anything on your site. So we're looking at the ratio that went on to click something, the ratio that touched the screen if it's a mobile device, or scroll the page or whatever. So if we have very high attentiveness on your landing page, that actually tells you that the ads were working better, right? So they actually went and did something like filled out a zip code search or search for something on your site. So all of that means you have a high quality, a very valuable user that got to your page. And it's almost like the opposite of a high bounce, right? These users actually did
Yeah.
something on your page.
I got another question from Yeshua.
Mhm.
What is your opinion about reCAPTCHA for sending a bot score back to the browser? And I kind of timed this question
Yeah.
with how we're detecting it on the website, and if we're using reCAPTCHA and sending a bot score back to the browser, and we're not sending any data at all, does it make it even harder, I guess, to submit that data to, Google or Microsoft to get a refund for
Yeah.
traffic that comes?
Yeah, reCAPTCHA is really not used for that. It's basically a CAPTCHA, right? So reCAPTCHA is just Google's version of CAPTCHA. So it is helpful in certain cases. So most website owners put a CAPTCHA on a form fill, right? So they have they hope that that's going to block the basic bots. But most people don't realize that bots easily solve the CAPTCHAs, and there's other ways they can get around the CAPTCHA anyway. So it really doesn't do anything. Recapture is not, it's more of a deterrent. It's not a detection, right? It's not a form of analytics. So what
I'll have
we
you
need
know
to
that
have,
that that first of all, sorry, recaptures are really difficult. Finding the frog that's standing up, that's positioned at 32 degrees northwest. Um, you know, maybe solving the captchas actually are a better way to find the bots than than not being able to solve the captures at this point.
Yeah, it's
Because
actually it's just pissing off more the humans, right? Because it takes the humans a few seconds to solve those before they can get to the content, which is could be a recipe or something. So I think it doesn't deter the bots as effectively as people think, and it's just putting up barriers to humans getting to the content. But the key point here is that the question was whether reCAPTCHA is useful in sending a bot signal. Yes, it is useful. Yes, it will capture the most basic bots, but reCAPTCHA is more of a deterrent. It's not a detection, right? So you can't actually use it for anything other than gating the users that come to your site.
and then
Okay,
there's a
and I can take
reCAPTCHA
it offline
v3.
afterwards. Yeah.
And I know reCAPTCHA v3 runs in the background and does some stuff to
Yeah.
determine, but it feels
It's
very
very
real
similar
time.
to Cloudflare Managed Challenge. So in some cases, you don't have to put up something that a human has to solve. So Cloudflare Managed Challenge will look for other things like was there mouse movement? Was there page scrolling? And for example, before you type something in a form, did you click the mouse to set the cursor into one of the form fields? If you didn't, then that wasn't a human. So there's a lot of these basic things that you can actually detect. It's more of a combination of things. A human actually has to touch the keyboard or touch the screen in order to fill in the form or something, right? Or type something. So those are things that are pretty obvious and straightforward. Again, bots can fake all of that, but if they're able to fill in the form, solve the capture, and submit it um, without having to fake all of those extra things, if they can get away with it, then they're not going to do all that extra work.
And so once they're on the site, I know a lot of folks would say, okay, well they can't make a purchase, they can't buy tickets, and let's say they get past a captcha, which if they're using the same technology as a CDN, part of the reason I discovered this entire me personally discovered this entire
Yeah,
bot issue is CDN was catching some, but letting a whole lot through because their job isn't to accidentally block someone from viewing site
yeah,
content. And I
yeah.
imagine maybe reCAPTCHA might use the same relatively conservative approach, but it depends on how you interact with it. Um, I guess
Well, see,
question my question
yeah,
is, can these bots, assuming they get through and they're browsing the site, I mean, can they submit transactions? Can they go because,
yes,
I'm gonna
easily.
say I have a CPL model, cost per
Yeah.
lead or cost per acquisition, CPA, whatever. Um, yeah, so, but, like how? How?
Yeah,
Like, it
let
has
me
to be, like,
actually
bogus cards or something like
yeah.
that.
No, it's actually very straightforward. So the bots can make purchases left and right. So there's been cases over the years where the bots are using stolen credit cards to buy virtual goods, to buy power-ups and all that in mobile games. And more recently, the bots are buying up all of Taylor Swift's tickets so that the scalpers can sell them for 5 times the money in the aftermarket, right? So bots can buy stuff. It's just a matter of whether they have an incentive to do it, right? So in the case of scalper bots, the problem has gotten so bad that in New York State, there's a Bots Act, BOTS, and I think it has to do with ticket sales, right? I don't remember what the acronym stands for, but there was a Bots Act that was passed in New York State to make it illegal for scalpers to use bots to buy up tickets to then resell it for higher money. So this has been a problem, like bots buying tickets from Ticketmaster, from all these concert venues and whatever. That's been a problem for 10 years, right? It is not new. And then, the bots are able to use stolen credit cards to buy those tickets and accumulate the physical goods, which then they resell later for cheap on Amazon or something. So all of those, people should realize not only can bots fill out the forms, solve the captchas, and submit those to get paid a CPL, that they can also easily buy up Taylor Swift tickets and then resell, for resale later. Okay, so again, bots can be very advanced, but it depends on what they're being used for, right? So for most of digital advertising, we don't need those advanced bots. We're just, seeing the bots load the page and or click on the ads. That's it.
So if I own a website or product or platform or whatever, and I ask you, hey, Dr. Fu, do I have bots on my website? What is your is it
Yeah,
always just
and
yes?
any website that's open on the internet can be hit by bots, right? So I have a website, I have some forms deliberately left open without captchas on my site on FouAnalytics.com, and I'm seeing a constant stream of bots filling it in with literally anything you can think of under the sun, right? Whether they're selling ED pills or anything else, or they're literally filling in really bad stuff into the forms. But I do that just so I can keep tabs. It's trivial for the bots to fill those in. But basically, yes, any website that's public can be hit by bot traffic. Now, the question is whether they need to do something about it, right? So, some of the analysis that we've done for website owners is okay, you might have 50% of your site traffic be bots, but if they were just hitting your page directly and they didn't come from clicking on your ad, then you can actually choose to do nothing because they're not costing you money other than the bandwidth cost of loading your web page, right? So those are bots that didn't come from your paid media. They just hit your page directly. So in those cases, the site owner can just decide whether they want to do something or not. Now,
And
if
is
you
that
have valuable content like publishers, you may actually want to
yeah.
block them because we know those bots are there to steal your content.
Now is that impacting my site analytics as well?
Yeah, so some people want to scrub out the bot activity from their site analytics. I typically recommend leaving it in so that you can actually see which bots they were and what the heck they were doing on your site. Okay. So, yeah, I mean, we can basically feed that back into Adobe Analytics or Google Analytics so that you can create segments with those bots and then scrub those out from analytics. But there was an interesting case with an automotive client. They actually saw a giant botnet kind of account for almost 2/3 of the page views on their site, right? So they had a lot of
Yeah.
automobile listings and things like that. Turns out those bots, they really didn't do anything. They weren't stealing the content. They were literally visiting the page so that they could collect the cookie to get retargeted later. So they were trying to pretend to be an automotive intender, right? Automobile intender,
Yeah.
meaning they would deliberately visit a whole bunch of automobile sites to say, oh yeah, this must be a user who's researching cars so that they might buy something, right? So we saw the botnet change its behavior. So before it was like July of 2017, before the botnet would hit the homepage and then leave straight from the homepage. And then after July 2017, we saw the entire botnet hit the homepage, visit two more pages, and then leave. Right. So every
Yeah.
single one of those bottom visits did the same thing. Right. And the behavior of the botnet changed. And the hypothesis was that the whoever was selling the retargeting services was saying if they just visited the page and left, we don't consider that engagement, right? They didn't do anything. So,
Yeah.
so the botnet basically came to the homepage, looked at two more pages to now satisfy that requirement. Oh yeah, they did something. They looked at two more pages, so it must be an auto intender. So those are the kinds of things that we can analyze based on having analytics on the site that GA won't show you and Adobe won't show you because they're just not tuned for this kind of stuff. So
Sounds like
what's
it's all
fun for me is
post-processing.
really, yeah, it's kind of getting into the an understanding of what those bots were trying to do on the website, right? That was an example of how we figured it out.
That's cool. And I think we have a question from Prabhakar. I'm butchering the pronunciation of your name. I'm sorry. How is click injection performed? And now, for the folks watching this isn't a training session on how to create your own
Yeah.
bots. Now that'll be the next episode where we talk through exactly how you can commit fraud, exactly like your heroes. But given that that's
Well,
not the only thing that they do, how is click injection performed?
yeah, I mean, I'm not even clear on what click injection means.
I'm
It's
guessing
either a
like
click.
faking clicks on
Yeah.
ads.
I mean, basically, you can actually, there's a click through URL. So on the ads, you would see a click through URL. When you click that, you go to the landing page, right? So it's the bots will just take that URL and load it in a browser, right? So when you see a page load on your own website, typically something coming from a paid ad would have UTM source equals Google search, or UTM source equals display, or something like that.
Yep.
So the bots are taking that URL complete with UTM source codes and just loading it. So this is literally coming full circle to where we started this
Yeah.
podcast. That's what we were seeing in our pharmaceutical campaigns, right? These were all paid search campaigns, and we were seeing clicks, more clicks than the number of ad impressions. And also we were seeing clicks after the campaign was over. And we could see it's UTM source equals this, UTM campaign equals that. So we know those URLs, those click-through URLs, came from those paid search campaigns. But yet the campaign was already done, no money was being spent. The bots had simply copied off that click-through URL, and they were just continuing to click
The
it.
URL.
Clicking it, and like I said, kind of tying this to the click events, if we see that the URL was loaded and there was no referrer, right? It didn't come from anywhere. Or we could actually see that it was loaded on a mobile device, but we didn't see a touch event. Okay, how a human has to touch the screen in order to click the ad. So again, those are very basic things that we can still see in the data. That's still occurring right now because none of the other fraud verification companies are checking those sufficiently, and Google Analytics is not set up to check that either. So that's why the most basic click fraud, is still occurring even to this day. And that's why you need better analytics so that you can see it and then see what kind of action you need to take to either stop it, or in some cases you may not even care because they're just hitting your page directly, not coming from anywhere.
Now, I want to leave some time to talk through briefly. Like, I think everybody has a bot problem to an extent.
Yeah.
I don't know how big of a bot problem you have. Coming into this call or coming into this podcast or video or whatever we want to call it, I was thinking, don't trust your denominators, right?
Yeah.
And as we talked, I'm starting to realize, don't trust your numerators. And by that, what I mean is, it's by that,
So
what I mean
Jim,
is,
you're getting to a point where it's like, don't trust anything.
don't trust anything.
Yeah.
Okay, hear me out. Okay. So our impression count's bogus. And if you're looking at industry benchmarks, you're depending on them to have the same level of scrutiny, the exact same level of scrutiny as you. Number one. Number two, on your website, you have a certain amount of visits or sessions or visitors. That's a pretty important denominator. And I'm assuming that people understand how much scrutiny that denominator is under. And that when we run these calculations of, like, I don't know, conversion rate, that we
Yeah.
factored in the fact that we have bots distorting the data
Yeah.
to some level of magnitude. What should people be doing about this? And how can they get closer to a real number?
Yeah, that's actually a great question to end on. So conversion rates are currently being artificially depressed, right? So you're going to see a certain number of sales occur on your website, but if the denominator, which is the amount of traffic, is inflated by bot activity, your conversion rate is going to be artificially low. Okay, so just using a simple ratio, if half of your traffic were from bots, right, that denominator is 2 times larger than it's supposed to be. If you scrub that out by having proper analytics, right, GA can't tell you this, Adobe can't tell you this, right? If you have FouAnalytics on your site, and we've done this for many clients over the years, if they can see that 50% of their traffic on their website is from bots, and they can scrub that out from the denominator, you've basically effectively doubled your conversion rate without doing anything, right? You're just bringing it back to something that's actually more accurate, because all of that bot activity, the bot page views on your site, are not going to lead to conversions. So you're dividing by an artificially large denominator, and therefore your conversion rate is artificially low. So I think that's a great use case for any analytics practitioner who is looking for ways to make their conversion rates and other analytics more accurate than it is right now, because it's kind of being polluted by all the bot activity on your site. And because GA doesn't show you and doesn't break it out, you really can't make your data more accurate with GA or Adobe. You need more advanced analytics.
It's another good reason not to use site traffic as a KPI. So
yes, and let me touch on
add it
one
to the
more quick
list.
thing,
Yeah.
which is like the concept of benchmarking. So a lot of people like to say, "Oh, how do we stack up against industry?" Right? So general benchmarks are actually problematic because those are kind of overall averages. But let me use something that's very concrete that I've dealt with as a site analytics practitioner. So time on site, they'll say, "What's a good time on site?" And people assume that longer time on site is better than shorter time on site. But let me give you an alternative explanation. Some people might be spending longer on your site because they couldn't find what they were looking for. So that's actually a worse experience. So longer time on site isn't necessarily better. In other case, on the flip side, someone might have found the answer in 1 second and left very happy. They found what they needed on your site. So shorter time on site is not necessarily worse. So what I typically recommend to analytics practitioners is use your organic traffic as your benchmark, right? And that's for your website, for your product category, for your industry. How do people arriving from paid channels stack up to your organic traffic? And organic, I mean people who arrive from paid search, right? Not direct. So if someone clicked on a search result and came to your website, they wanted to be there. So what are the characteristics of those users, right? Whether it's time on site, whether it's page views per visit, all that kind of stuff. Use that as your internal benchmark. That's way better than any kind of generic benchmark from the industry.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Fou, thank you so much. And thank you, everybody who tuned in today. I
Thanks.
hope you found this informative and useful. For everybody else who's not familiar, go to FouAnalytics.com to check out Dr. Fou's awesome bot detection and fraud detection product and reach out directly to him. I think is probably, can people reach out directly to you? Is that okay?
Yep, directly on LinkedIn or augustine.fou@FouAnalytics.com. Thank you very much, Jim.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Thanks, everybody.